G'day guys and gal. The debate about which Space Marine chapter is the best never ends. You'll hear a lot of people say the Black Templars, Ultramarines, Blood Angels, even Crimson Fists. However, we can all agree to set aside our differences and bask in our collective love of the Space Sharks. They hold a special place in everyone's hearts, despite very few people actually painting their army in that scheme. However, with reasonably sparse lore, a bland color scheme, and only one out-of-date, out-of-production, pretty mid model, you think they wouldn't be that interesting, or that many people would actually like them. I mean, they barely even talk, but you would be dead wrong, as actions speak louder than words, and boy do these guys have some sick actions. 5 of the best I'll be going over today. Before we get started, hold on to your panties because I'm about to drain your balls and your wallets, as Major Minis is very excited to finally release the complete Galactic Shark army, featuring 6 new models to add to the 4 already existing models. These new models include the Shark Captain, an epic sculpt and a worthy HQ unit for your Shark Force. We're also releasing 3 Shade Lord Honor Guard Terminators, the greatest warriors of the Sharks who guard the Shark Daddy himself. On top of that, we have released 2 more Shark Marines to bring the Shark Squad from 3 to 5 Marines, making it much more practical for use in your army. Keep in mind, all Shark Marines are entirely modular, so you can swap their heads, shoulders, and weapons between them to create shitloads of unique configurations. To top it all off, I'm also releasing a Shark Upgrade Pack, fully compatible and tested with official models to Sharkify the shit out of your army. That's right, you can now create a full Shark army using official models alongside third-party models with the Upgrade Pack all proportioned for tabletop. The Shark Upgrade Pack includes 10 unique helmets, 10 power packs, 20 custom shoulder pads, 8 weapons, alongside numerous other ornaments. Now, although I now consider the Shark army to be complete, that doesn't mean we can't add more to it. If this sells well, I can get Mecha Shark Riders as jetbike proxies, a hectic Shark Wizard, more of the Terminators, a Shark Chaplain, Tech Shark Marine. I'll literally pump out sharks till I die, so if you think this is sick, then by picking it up, you'll keep it coming. We also have a huge range of other Major Minis. I literally have virtually the entire range behind me now. I don't even know if I should be showing this, as there are a couple unreleased Major Minis here, but oh well. Don't worry, my official armies I've painted like my Custodes and Elder still hold a place of honor in another cool display cabinet. Link to the Shark army and all other Major Minis below. This is a launch I've been gearing up for months. So sick to finally launch it. Today we'll go over 5 of the best Space Shark moments in the lore, which should show why they are so beloved. Let's get into it. So as a bit of a lore TLDR for the Sharky boys, also known as the Charcharodons, I probably fucked that pronunciation up, are an extremely isolated, weird, and downright scary loyalist chapter. They were descended from the Terran Raven Guard Marines that Korax banished from his legion during the Great Crusade, as they reminded him too much of the oppressors he overthrew in his homeworld. These Terran Raven Guard basically just patrolled the outer galaxy, the deep void, hunting for threats. It was a thankless job, and almost everyone forgot they existed for thousands of years. They also underwent pretty severe mutation, developing their own quirks. They deliberately hid from the Imperium, as they had been in self-exile for so long, and they also recruited and rearmed by basically kidnapping people from Imperial worlds and threatening and even raiding loyalist Mechanicus worlds. Now, they would occasionally pop up in the lore, do something cool, then vanish for a few thousand years, which would go on to make them more of a myth and legend. They're also somewhat of a meme, as they embody sharks even more than the Space Wolves embody wolves. It's just lucky no one considers sharks as a viable persona. For example, if they fight near water, they will swim through the water like a shark, drag their enemies into the depths, and then literally bite them to death. They also do not speak during combat and rarely speak in general. I suppose sharks also don't speak. They also have a pet Megalodon. They can enter a state of rage, similar to the Black Rage, called the Blindness, which triggers when they sense potential blood and slaughter. It's actually remarked that they show incredible willpower by not screaming or yelling in battle despite the sense of rage, and they maintain their discipline. Another note is that they are based on the Maori, in a similar way to how Ultramarines are based on Romans and Dark Angels are based on Knights. This is evident by some of their naming conventions and their Islander themes, which also means these are some big boys, which would explain why Tyberos is such a unit. Another fun fact is that it's heavily implied that the Space Sharks have stolen and used gene seed from traitor legions, such as the Night Lords and World Eaters, which further mutates them and contributes to their vibe. Final fun fact, they literally have a giant Megalodon pet. They recently have re-entered the setting and are now known and feared across the galaxy. When they first left their exile, the Imperium didn't actually know who they were or who they served, with the ID codes they provided being extremely ancient but surprisingly still valid, that being the code of the ancient Terran Raven Guard. Also, their personal doctrine literally states that there is no such thing as honor, which is kind of badass and will explain a fair bit of their actions. Okay, let's start with their first awesome moment. A big part of why the Space Sharks are so beloved is because of Tyberos, their chapter master. This dude is a unit. Now, I've caught flack before by saying he is massive and people now think he is larger than he actually is in the lore, but those people can suck my dick. A Space Marine is 7 to 8 feet tall, let's say 8 feet for the Maori-based Space Sharks. Marines and Terminator armor are notably taller than standard power armor, so let's say 9 feet for the Space Shark Terminators. Tyberos was described as a head taller than his elite honor guard Terminators, who themselves would have been 9 foot or taller. A Space Marine's head makes up about 15% of their height, especially considering they have giganticism, thus larger proportionate heads, so that would make him another 1.5-ish feet taller than his elite honor guard, putting him at over 10 feet tall. He's fucking massive. So massive in fact that the tech priest who first saw him had his readings come back that Tyberos was a statue, as his stillness and size did not make sense for a Space Marine. Anyway, I did have to clear that up quickly as people keep thinking Tyberos' size is overblown and that he's just a little bit taller than a normal Space Marine. Fuck no, he's an absolute unit. Also, his weapons, Hunger and Slake, are relics held onto by the original Terran Raven Guard and are now possessed by Tyberos, as none of those Marines would have been able to wield them. As none of the Marines have been able to wield them until Tyberos, it's thought that these weapons were Corvus' siege lightning claws. Just another fun fact. Anyway, our first moment involves Tyberos solo defending a ship from a force of elite Tyranid warriors. They had boarded the ship and Tyberos had decided to go down to the tunnel which acted as a choke point. He brought along a single space shark with him, not to help, merely to witness it appeared. The Tyranid warriors began emerging from the breach. Tyberos charged, apparently being the only Space Marine other than Logan Grimner who could sprint in Terminator armor. The entire corridor shook and shuddered to his footsteps until he smashed into them, sending the warriors flying and then cutting them to shreds, killing 3 in as many seconds. He then told the other space shark to wait there while he entered the boarding pod and destroyed it from the inside, which he then proceeded to do. The other shark described watching Tyberos fight as like watching a force of nature. He also remarked that Tyberos was extremely fast, not in terms of moving his body, but more so his arms and claws. They would become a blur as he shredded into his enemies. Honestly, the way they described Tyberos fighting sounds a lot like how Marines describe Primarchs fighting. Tyranid warriors are also often considered a match for Space Marines, both in the lore and tabletop. In Space Marine 2, you literally see a Tyranid warrior kill a Space Wolf Deathwatch Marine, and they're pretty tough bastards. So Tyberos butchering them like chaff should give you a good idea of this dude's girth. Next up, I want to talk about some cool Space Shark lore, which isn't just glazing their dicks off and gargling their balls. See, sometimes good lore isn't just about one side being dope and the other side being weird and gay. This was awesomely highlighted when the Space Sharks and Night Lords squared up during a Red Tithe. A Red Tithe being an unconsensual recruitment drive. See, the Space Sharks struggle to recruit. They aren't friendly, they are a nomad fleet, their recruitment process is grueling, and their gene seed is pretty mutated, so their success rate is pretty low. So basically, they wanted to kidnap a prison station's worth of potential recruits, including a Psyker child who had a lot of potential to become a Space Shark librarian, who themselves were very rare and very powerful. However, the Night Lords also arrived at the prison station as they wanted the Psyker child for themselves to perform some demonic voodoo that would have been a huge no-no for the Imperium. Now, it wasn't just Space Sharks demolishing Night Lords. Both sides had their share of wins and losses during the engagement. However, the Night Lords' terror tactics didn't work super well against the Shark Boys, and the initial engagements went poorly for the Night Lords, who struggled to deal with the viciousness of the Space Sharks combined with their discipline. Usually when an enemy is vicious, they can be baited into ambushes or taken advantage of, but the Space Sharks would rip you limb from limb, but then tactically withdraw to a better position. The Night Lords had never encountered the Space Sharks before, and were unnerved by their complete lack of noise, and even their demon was confused. The end result was the boy was taken by the Sharks, they lost about half their force present, and ended up with a few thousand potential recruits, which was calculated to end up being around 35 or so new Sharks. The Night Lords fled after suffering serious casualties and now probably have some PTSD. Now, the arrival of the Space Sharks into the current setting was a legendary affair, as it took place during the Badab War, basically a micro-Horus heresy where numerous loyalist chapters turned renegade, not to chaos, just against the Imperium. The Imperium put out a call to summon chapters to it, and the Space Sharks answered. As I said earlier, the Imperium was pretty confused and didn't know which side the Sharks were on, but quickly found out as the Space Sharks brutally engaged the Mantis Warriors. They initially targeted civilian populations that were under the Mantis Warriors' protections, slaughtering them to draw the Mantis Warriors out, who felt honor-bound. As the Mantis Warriors left their fortresses to defend the civilians, the Space Sharks made short work of them, beating down the Mantis Warriors, ransacking their supplies, and knocking them out of the war. They would then go on to destabilize and more or less blow up a number of other planets, sending a pretty stern message. Should be pretty clear by now that mercy and honor are not words the Space Sharks acknowledge. Now, there wasn't much of a deep reason why they left exile and made themselves known for the first time in thousands of years, beyond the fact that they were in the area at the time and they smelled blood. It worked out extremely well that the loyalist chapters involved in spanking the renegade chapters were more or less allowed to ransack them, stealing their aspirants, weapons, armor, tech, ships, and even gene seed. The Space Sharks literally stole the Mantis Warriors' aspirants and forced them to fight each other to the death to prove their worth to the chapter. To be fair though, it did send a message. Betraying the Imperium was not a great idea. When the Mantis Warriors were sent on their penitent crusade to make amends for their betrayal, man, you literally cannot rub any more salt in that wound even if you tried. And finally, the coolest, most obscure moment from the Space Sharks lore is the War of the False Primarch. We don't know a crazy amount about this, but what we do know is that the High Lords convened 5 of the most vicious, bloodthirsty, and effective loyalist chapters into a force known as the Pentarchy of Blood. The Space Sharks were amongst this 5. They were tasked with exterminating 11 renegade chapters led by a figure claiming to be a Primarch. So if we say each chapter is around 1,000 Marines, that was 5,000 versus 11,000, and a figure who was powerful enough to convince 11,000 Marines that he was a Primarch. It took 80 years, but the Pentarchy was successful. They exterminated each of the 11 chapters, destroyed their homeworlds, and then killed this False Primarch. If I had to guess, I would say the False Primarch was some kind of extra large, charismatic sorcerer space marine. Someone who would look like a Primarch to those who had heard of Primarchs but never met them. We don't know much about this war, but we know the result. We know the space sharks were involved, and we know they kicked some extremely serious ass. Definitely one of the most interesting Easter egg parts of the lore, and I'd love to know more about. If after all that you don't like the space sharks yet, then yep, well, eat a dick. I don't know. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up the Shark Army. You can get them as a full pack, smaller bundles, or even as individual models if you just want one or two. Join the Discord for more memes, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.